This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey, man. It's 4:30, just gone on was there Wednesday? During my lunch break at the end of the day today, so I can finish an hour early. So I'm just strolling out now into glorious sunshine, shorts and a t-shirt. Just wanted to send you a little voice note about a movie I watched the other night. I'm in the midst of what I call animated April, watching an animated film every day throughout April. It's something I do every year, and I hit one the other night. So when I select films for this, I look up lists of best animated films, like interesting, unique animated films, like, the typical type of lists you'd expect one would be looking at when trying to curate a month of animated films and make it eclectic and varied. And obviously I've seen a lot of animated films, so I'm kind of having to go to deeper cuts a lot of the time to see new things. But one thing that pops up a lot of these lists are, especially when you go into the kind of like indie animation or alternative animation, more obscure titles, you get a lot of movies that's debatable whether they're animation or not. That could be because there's something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where it's a mixture of live action and animation. It could be because it's a motion capture movie like Beowulf or Polar Express, where animators aren't like sitting down and animating characters. It's essentially a live action film that's rotoscope. And yeah, a smorgasbord of different things. But there's a few films that actually popped up this year for me already, at least two, that are more puppet films. Well, not more puppet films. They absolutely are puppet films. But if you look into them online, look up like writing about them, they'll very often be described as being stop motion animation films. And I think that's because people, maybe they see a still or they see a little clip of it and they're not really thinking, like they just see like little models moving around and their brain goes to stop motion animation. But essentially what they are is kind of like Team America. They're puppet animation movies. And I said animation there, it's kind of Freudian slip, because I think if you want to get into like a really pedantic, technical conversation about what is animating, then I think you'd probably fall down on the side of puppetry is not animating. Now, the case can be made that you are taking something that doesn't move on its own and you're animating that thing by moving it. But in terms of like everything that we understand to be like the craft of animation, they're generally not included. And I certainly have never heard, Muppet Treasure Island being called an animated film. So anyway, they kind of get lumped in, but they're a different thing. And there's a lot of crossover. And they often feature little bits of stop motion animation. This one I watched the other night, which is called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story. As far as I can remember, it doesn't have any scenes of actual stop motion animation in the mix. It's all just the characters moving around on screen in like kind of, live action, if you will, like straightforward filmed scenes. But it definitely sort of sits in well with a series of stop motion animated films or animated films, because of all of the craft that goes into it in terms of like constructing the sets and, the concessions and sort of strategies you have to take when you're making a film. that's not with actual real humans on screen? How do you convey emotion and stuff like that? And this film is even more challenging because it's a film entirely, well, almost entirely starring Barbie dolls and Ken dolls. It's directed by Todd Haynes, who's gone on to be one of the most respected Hollywood directors of his generation. It's listed on IMDb as a short, but when I'm choosing films for these themed months I basically say if it's over 40 minutes, it's a feature. That's what the Academy Awards says. If it's over 40 minutes, it's a feature. So to me, this is a feature film, and that would make it his first feature film. He made 2 shorts before this. Now, I've seen several of his later films and really, really liked them. So I think he's gone on to be a brilliant filmmaker. And I think this is a little bit like El Mariachi, where you get to see what would a director who eventually is kind of revered and talented and commercially successful and, really knows how to put a movie together, what would they do given basically or very little experience and very little money, very little resources, no access, nothing other than just the will to throw a movie together. And this is a great exhibit of that. It's well edited, well shot, well put together. It tells a story. It's my most hated genre, which is the musical biopic. Now, I think we've discussed in the past that these biopics are usually best if they focus on a limited period. It kind of does that. It doesn't show her whole childhood and stuff. It's basically from when they're first breaking through to her untimely death. But it is still like, it doesn't really feel like much is left out that you would want to be left out, from my opinion. And then again, I dislike this genre of film, so usually I'm just not enjoying it the whole way through. So the last thing I want is more of that. But this one worked better for me than most musical biopics. Just gonna pop into supermarket there now. I'm gonna pause this voice note and continue it in a second. All right, they didn't have anything I would. Moving on to the next shot. But yeah, it's I love this this band, Carpenters. The song that opens the movie, Superstar, is one of my favorite songs of all time, and I listen to their music quite a bit. I really love it. So I think that's always a factor that affects these films. Like, as much as you might have thoughts about the genre itself and like how interesting it is to watch it, just a usually very glorified depiction of just their band's story, which is, largely identical to every other music biopic you see. It can be elevated or hurt by your feelings on the music, and I love the music in this case. So it's a short film that's snappy and then just kind of gives you all the hits as well. So that's one factor in it. But on that subject, I presume, could be wrong with this, but I presume he didn't have any permission to use this music. It feels like this is a film that was made for almost no money, or maybe self-funded. So having actual legal access to the catalogue of one of the most iconic acts of the 70s seems unlikely. I would assume that this is more of a film that could never really be properly legally distributed, and it was more just like a personal project. I think I could be wrong on that. I haven't actually looked into it, but there's something interesting about being able to make a film, like making a film so cheaply and so outside of the system that you don't have to just make it a complete kiss-ass piece for the artist in question, yet you can still use all of their great music. Because there's that classic thing of so many of our favorites musicians, so many of the most iconic musicians were pretty horrible people in real life, but if you show them how they really were, then you can't use the music. So it always feels a bit weird when you watch a musical biopic, but it doesn't have the music of the artist. And then if it does have the music, almost without exception, it's going to be a very flattering portrait of their character and how they conducted themselves. So you're kind of taking an already boring genre and you're putting it through this mesh of like essentially serving as some sort of propaganda or like whitewashing tool for the artist. So in this case, it's just, it seems to me that this is told in exactly the way that the director and writer want it to be told, as opposed to sort of kowtowing to any external pressure from the label or whatever. And then by putting in the music as well, they're kind of condemning it to being an oddity that would screen. I don't know what the goal was professionally for this. Like maybe it served as a calling card, but you know, a few years later, he's making movies with Julianne Moore, and then he's gone from strength to strength, and ironically went on to make one of the other most genre-defying and form-defying musical biopics in the Bob Dylan one, where lots of different actors play Dylan. The other thing I was thinking, funnily enough, watching this is that this is now, in terms of my viewing experience, by far and away the best and most interesting and most subversive critique of femininity and the patriarchy ever made by an indie director using the iconography of Barbie, which is funny. That's two movies. I mean, I suppose the character or the icon of Barbie invites that kind of theming. So maybe it makes sense that, like, if you're going to make a movie either about Barbies or using Barbies, that it's going to be an interrogation of a woman's role and, you know, body image and stuff like that. But yeah, this film certainly is a lot leaner and more effective, in my opinion, than the Greta Gerwig movie, which is itself has its own, you know, strengths, but I don't think it's got this deft touch. It's also obviously a portrait of eating disorders. I watched it with my wife and I was saying, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, you'd hear the word anorexia constantly. I mean, it was just like a hot button thing that was constantly talked about. And now I don't think I've heard that word for years. It could be a decade since I last heard that word. She said, well, now they say eating disorders. So maybe that's gone away. I don't know if it's if there's some sort of insensitivity to using anorexia, or maybe it's too triggering a word, I'm not sure. But yeah, interesting going back to this era when a lot of big iconic musicians were dying young, and so many of them, it was from drug overdoses, that you kind of get to the point where you hear that one of them died young, you'd be like, oh yeah, that'll be a drug overdose. And then diving into this, now this is something, you know, arguably much more tragic, because it was a torturous ordeal that she was going through the whole time. It wasn't that just that she was having a lot of fun and then one night things kind of went wrong. It was you know, something that really, really plagued her life. And I've seen some movies about eating disorders. There's a character in Men, Women and Children, I believe it's played by Elle Fanning, that has bulimia, I think. And there's, you know, I've seen it pop up here and there, but in terms of a whole movie kind of digging into that subject matter, this was probably the most detailed and the best one I've seen, and does a really good job of it. Again, it's not that long of a movie, so it kind of, it doesn't outstay its welcome. It gets in, it paints a really vivid and claustrophobic and, I guess, fateful picture, because you know the outcome, even if you're not familiar with Karen herself. You see the beginning of the movie, so you know where it's heading. And yeah, it's a real, like, you know, the tragic thing of, like, it looks like she's trying to get out of it, but no, she'll never get out of it, kind of thing. I've also seen the movie Safe that he made maybe 7 years after this one, and that's again about, like, a woman, sort of like a lot of his films, kind of trying to live up to external pressures and in the midst of really significant mental health issues, and depicting a very niche, well, however niche anorexia is, but depicting a mental illness that not that many people have. Not enough people that it's kind of just like here, there, and everywhere. So yeah, he seems to be good at that kind of thing. What else to say about it? Unfortunately, and this, I think, again, is what makes me feel that it might not be possible to legally distribute this film. The copy I watched of it was very, very low quality, and it has a lot of, for starters, the copy has degraded over time through various transfers. I'm not sure what it was initially shot on, but at this point, the only way I can find to view it, it's in a very darkened state, the picture quality, and it has a lot of scenes where you have black text overlaying the action. And when you've got very, very darkened footage, sort of degraded over time, with black text superimposed on top of it, it's unfortunately quite hard to read it a lot of the time. So I didn't feel like I was like missing out on too much of the movie, but I'm sure there are certain plot points that I missed. But it's mainly there in the performances, and I know performances sounds like a weird phrase to use when it's literally just like Barbie dolls being turned left to right. But you know when they say like you get like Mark Wahlberg in a Scorsese movie, and he looks like he's like, you know, should be just winning Oscars left, right, center, and then once you separate him from the great director, it's a bit that you know, there isn't necessarily as much there. A lot of it was being helped by the direction and the editing and so forth. This film is so well shot and so well edited, considering the challenge at hand of like making it feel like real dynamic, engaging scenes. They're often like really dramatic scenes of like fights around dinner tables or people marching into rooms and all sorts of character work. And with the limitation of having to do all that with like just, you know, bouncing little dolls around the screen, I think they do an amazing job. And yeah, like I felt from the very get-go, I felt it was really engaging. I think that there was a real purpose to making it with, well, two purposes that I could identify with making it with Barbie dolls. One was to circumvent any budget restrictions in place, and two is because of sort of thematic place in culture of, in terms of body standards and beauty standards and stuff that Barbie holds, and just in terms of womanhood and stuff like that. So yeah, it all comes together really well. I think it was a smart little idea. I think it's really impressive when you see sort of first-time directors who have no real resources at their disposal figuring out a little project that they can pull off that will sort of serve as a calling card and allow them to move on to do bigger and better things. So yeah, good flick. I hope you liked it as well. Hope you didn't suffer too much from the poor picture quality, but yeah, that seems to be all that's left of this film now. And I've seen a few of his films since then, but there are also very highly regarded films by him that I haven't seen. So not least of which is his most recent film, May December, which came out in the last couple of years. So that's one I'd like to check out. But yeah, good flick and an interesting little take on the musical biopic.
Hey man, just getting back to you now about Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story. It's funny, when you sent the message, you said, oh, I'm here on a Wednesday, and it was actually Thursday. So that just goes to show you where your head's at with all your outside and work woes or whatever you were saying. I can't remember what it was. And I watched this movie on my 20, no, not on my 20, on my second week of lack of 24-hour sleep every second day because of looking after my cat. So have to say that I did not watch this under ideal circumstances, and in many ways I had a hard time with this movie, and in many ways I don't think I've got so much to add to what he said, but there's a few points I suppose that I can pick up on. But let me set the tone for this a minute. This reminded me in a weird way, and it's a movie that I haven't finished watching, so this might come across as a criticism, but it's actually not. This reminded me a little bit of Skinamarink in a way. I don't know if it's because the quality degraded of this movie. I mean, technically over the years because of the copy, or there's something else. But this movie did very much capture those type of whispers in the hallway and that type of auditory psychology, I suppose. When you hear the family talking over the dinner table and at the back of concerts, I suppose, or wherever it was. I'm not familiar with Karen Carpenter and the Carpenters. Now, when the soundtrack was playing throughout this movie, I realized I am very familiar with lots of these songs and I do like them. But for some reason, like many songs from there, I didn't attach them to a particular artist. So the degrading of the film and the text not being able to be read and stuff like that, that took me out of it. Like, I don't tolerate that in any movie. Like, that's not okay for me. Just because it's a cult movie or renowned and everything, that's just not good enough, personally, I think, for an experience on one level, for things to be degraded so much at times that it takes you out of the movie and takes you away from it. And it seems like you didn't have that problem and you went with it, which is great for you. You can go with it, I suppose, but it's not good enough to be watching something at that level of a copy. Now, I'm a stickler for quality and that type of thing anyway, so maybe that was more of an impact, but that was really frustrating. Now, the good. So, number one, it's a better Barbie movie than Barbie. I really like what you said about the two reasons for it being a Barbie movie in terms of body standards and femininity and whatnot, which I think comes up in the text that I couldn't read at one point. And that's a great point. And I actually hadn't considered that at all until he said it. So yeah, I really, really love that point. I'll give you a third point. I think there's a sense that this version of Karen Carpenter is not in control of her illness and in control of her body and in control of her agency. So the fact that dolls were also used and controlled, obviously, by puppet masters, as you said, I think that's also thematically on point, which is really good. And I actually really enjoyed the doll scenes just from a pure technical level. It's really impressive, isn't it? And again, great point you made where you see, when you see Mark Wahlberg or someone like that being directed by a master, or even someone like Kavangele Wallace, is it, in the Beasts movie, whatever it was called. You just get these directors sometimes that just can fill the blocking and fill their shots to make somebody look like a star and make someone really impressive. To see somebody being able to do that with dolls is amazing. And it's funny because it occurred to me as well that this movie, as avant-garde as it is at times, sometimes frustratingly so, is almost like this might seem like way off, but it's almost like YouTube, free YouTube, in how it's conceived, this whole thing. You've got inserts of different shots that, like President Nixon, was it Nixon? You get shots of someone puking, and it seems like somebody very much just doing their own thing with no budget that you would see on YouTube today. Now, what separates this from YouTube, which is very striking and which I'm very appreciative of, is you can really see an auteur at work here. You can really see the difference between somebody who has all these things at their disposal, like insert shots. And this movie to me is very much like a horror movie at times, with some of its music, some of its shots of the laxative and pills or whatever she was taking for her condition. Well, for what she thought was her problem. It's very much played out like a horror movie for me. Like I said, I'm going down London Road now, which is one of the busiest roads in Croydon. So much like the quality of the movie's tape for this next spot, the quality of my audio might take a bit of a turn. Okay, I've managed to get past that a little bit now, but it's probably going to be chaos. So yeah, it is fascinating seeing an auteur put their stamp on something with absolutely no budget, being able to create their singular vision, singular style of shots, and just being able to elevate this I guess short movie to a very high standard, which again, as I said, I had a tough time of it in places. It was short, so ultimately it wasn't the people under the stairs for me. I like it a lot more than that. But from a filmmaking perspective, it's actually inspiring. Not since Kablam or Kazam or whatever the fuck it is, that show as a kid, have I been so invested in just watching dolls on screen. So yeah, I'm not mad at you for sending it my way. It is great to be able to see something like this and experience something like this, because it's just so unique as well. It's almost like, at times, like something, if David Lynch made a movie with dolls, what he might do as well. And it is quite affecting, and it does give you a real sense of feeling and dread. So what he managed to achieve is really impressive. And like you, I haven't seen a lot of Todd Haynes movie. Man, this road is fucking ridiculous. Fucking London, man. Jesus. I'm just trying to get my cafe. But yeah, the Todd Haynes, I know he's done one called May December, I think, that you mentioned, that I haven't seen. I'm actually not familiar with a lot of his stuff. I think I watched another of his movies and it was quite meh for me, and then that never inspired me to watch more. Now, as frustrating at times this was for me, mainly due to the copy, I think it's made me more interested in someone who can do this than maybe a movie like May December, who looks very much like Oscar bait on paper. This type of movie makes me more interested, especially because it's his first. This type of movie makes me more interested in seeing the evolution of the guy, perhaps, or maybe at least checking out one more of his movies. So yeah.
Hey man, it's just coming up on 9 p.m. on Tuesday. I'm just wandering out of the house. A very rare instance of me leaving the house in the evening on a weekday. I've just got a couple of errands to run, and I listened to your voice note a good few days ago, and I just haven't had the time to respond. So I thought now would be a good time to get something in. Don't have a huge amount to add to what you said there. It's interesting that you raised the comparison to the film Skinamarink, which I watched a few months ago. I sort of tried to get you to watch it. I think you got about half an hour in or something. I just couldn't do any more. I think most people probably have that interaction with Skinamarink. I've certainly heard a lot where people are like, yeah, it was the third attempt when I could actually sort of see it through the whole way. But it is funny that, isn't it? That it's not just films that you've seen, that you've fully seen, and that are, that have left a big impression on you, that have become points of reference. It's also sometimes films that you've maybe seen the trailer for, or maybe you remember it was in your playing on TV when you were a kid and you caught a bit of it, and it just continues to be this like touchstone for you in terms of it represents a very specific thing. Whenever that thing pops up, you're like, yeah, just like such and such. I can see what you mean here with the comparison. So obviously we've got the version that we're able to see now of Superstar, which is very lo-fi, very degraded, very grainy, beyond grainy, just like, very, very difficult to see. And that's the aesthetic that Skinamarink goes for. It kind of deliberately buries itself in kind of very, it's not degraded, it's just like incredibly low bit rate, poor quality footage. And in one case, it's through, it's intentional. It's part of the, the whole kind of concepts. And in the other, in the case of Superstar, I think it's probably more a symptom of the picture quality that he was actually able to achieve with the camera that he had, combined with the, I suppose, the way the film has aged over time. But yeah, interestingly enough, they do kind of end up with the same result. I suppose in the case of Skinamarink, it makes sense that you're not able to see much because it's all about kind of looking into the shadows in a bedroom, or, looking up at like a very dark wall and your imagination playing with your head. This doesn't have any of that kind of like meta connection with the lack of clarity on screen. But in terms of like a haunting, like found media, I don't quite know what I'm seeing type of, it's all a bit obscured for me, and therefore it makes me, it's a little unnerving. It has that. And as you said, it is something of a horror film. I've always kind of gone back and forth on when people describe, every film under the sun as a horror film. You certainly see that like some horror circles where it's like, yeah, everything is a horror film. This is a horror film. This is a horror film because of a statement that's making about capitalism, like Wall Street. That's a horror film. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but what's even the point of having the horror genre if you make it so wide that it includes basically everything with any amount of conflict or negativity in the world? But in this film, it definitely, I agree that there's major horror vibes here. It's not just about anorexia, but it's a very immersive kind of psychological portrait of the anxiety that one would experience undergoing anorexia or suffering from anorexia. So yeah, big horror vibes, and all that works with the like dirty, dusty, found aesthetic. Now, you've said, I think in your voice message, and we're going back a little while now, from when I listened to it, but I think you said that like the picture quality in this film is just not good enough. Like it's unacceptable or something. And it sounded to me like you were critiquing the film on that basis. I mean, to be clear, I think the picture quality, like the inability to read the black text and stuff like that, is not the way the film was when it was first made. I think it's aged poorly, and you could certainly argue that like there's some amateurish aesthetic choices in the film that didn't lend themselves to visual clarity even in the first place. But I do think that we've lost something over time, and maybe someday we'll get a Blu-ray version of this film that is not going to look crystal clear, but I think it's going to look a lot more readable. You'll be able to read that text for sure. So I don't know if that was a criticism of the film or a criticism of just like you're not willing to go to that. Like if a film looks that bad, you're kind of like, at that point it's fallen outside of my interests. If it's the latter, then yeah, that's definitely a place where we diverge from one another. As I'm doing right now, I watch an animated film every day in April, and I watch a horror film every day in October. And curating those lists, especially after years of doing it, sends me to really obscure deep cuts, especially the animation ones. A lot of the films I've watched this month so far are like really obscure old Czech or Russian animated films, very early in animation history, and almost all the time it's not possible to see the film in forget about 4K. You probably struggle to even see it in 720p, and oftentimes bits of the film are missing, or when I watch the horror films, I'll often watch like old silent horror films where they've attempted to kind of cobble together something as best they can, but there's just, this scene is sourced from a very different reel than another one, so it looks completely different. This bit we got sound, this bit we don't. So for one, I'm interested in interesting film artifacts, and I'm happy to explore them and enjoy them and love them. It's not like a purely academic exercise, but I'm happy to go to these places, understanding that I'm not going to be getting high fidelity AV experience. But yeah, in the case of this film, I think it was probably a really lo-fi film when it was made. I actually still haven't researched the making of the film, but I'm just assuming that he was kind of a nobody from a sort of industry perspective when he made this film, and was probably using quite off-the-shelf equipment. So yeah, but again, I feel like he made it work. He did a lot with it. I like the film a fair bit. I think it sounded like you were not like in love with the film, but you admire that you can actually see the glimmer of this guy's got something. And that alone is always interesting, especially when you don't have to invest too much time into it. When you can watch a film, you're like, this is not the finished article by any means, but this is, we're seeing someone with talent. We're seeing some talent up on the screen. So anyway, I'm going to go about my errands now. And yeah, hopefully we can catch up on some more of his work, some more of his more evolved work soon.
In the space of that 9-minute voice note you sent, Aston Villa were 5-2 down, and then it was 5-4 by the time I got to the end of the voice note. That's how manic that game was. It's over now, but quite insane. So yeah, me saying it's unacceptable is certainly not a criticism of the movie itself. I don't know if it came across like that, but I feel like it is very unacceptable in terms of my viewing experience. Like if somebody said to me, have you seen Superstar, the Karen Carpenter Story? I still would say no, because it's so far from the vision that, well, maybe not the vision, that's it, but it's so far from the product of 1987 that was shown, presumably anyway. But it seems like it's degraded so much and key things are missing and key text is missing that it feels like I'm not viewing anything remotely like somebody who's seen it in 1987 would. That's not to say you can't have an interesting experience and you can talk about what you have seen, which is remnants of that movie from the time. But in terms of what was, I couldn't. As an artist, I don't know how Todd Haynes feels about it, but I would feel if I saw something like this going around that it is quite different and quite lacking quality from the original copy, that would drive me crazy. But I don't know, maybe he's got a different take. And I'm quite a stickler for things like that anyway, because I remember I was watching Terminator 2 not so long ago and I realized it was the version with all the extra footage. And I was showing my partner for the first time. And then it was key slants in that version that by the end of it, I thought I actually haven't shown her Terminator 2 because there's such a key change in certain scenes, and it doesn't take much for you to give a completely different impression from somebody who would have viewed the alternative version, that it would be like seeing a completely different movie. So I always have that feeling anyway with work, so I was always going to come away with something like this with feeling like I actually haven't seen the movie. But yeah, lots to admire about it and lots to talk about in terms of what we did get to see. It's just something like this is very frustrating to me because I want to see the best version possible. I'm gonna make a separate case to contradict not really contradict what I just said, but to appraise this copy even more with reverence, despite what I said. Well, not really despite what I said, but there's an alternative viewpoint of why this bootleg is important. So I was just doing a little bit of research there. It turns out when Todd Haynes released this film, he didn't get any permission from the Carpenter family, mainly Richard Carpenter, who did not like how the family and himself was portrayed in this movie. So he sued Haynes for clearance and he won, which blocked this movie's release. And I was just reading there that the Museum of Modern Art has a copy, which presumably is the original, and has an agreement with the Carpenter estate that they do not exhibit it at all. But separate to this copy of the original, there's a lot of bootleg copies in circulation. So presumably that is the version we've been watching. And there's something to be said for seeing something that you aren't allowed to see and something that's been taken away artistically from you. Without these bootlegs, this movie would be locked behind closed doors in a museum and we'd never get to see it. We'd only be able to hear about it. And how frustrating is that? So the fact that there's this relic almost that's circling around in places like YouTube and wherever you manage to get a copy from, and we're able to view it, it almost goes counter to something I really hate, where something is kept from you by an authority and something is kept in safe hands of certain institutions and people. So I've gained a lot more respect from this, having read that as well. And the other thing is, if there's bootleg copies, and there's presumably maybe different versions, different levels of quality, different levels of acquirement over the years, that people could be having a completely different experience each time they watch this movie, depending on what kind of copy and what kind of bootleg. And like I said, the Museum of Modern Art probably has a copy of the most polished version of the movie, but now that there's a story behind this, there's something very forbidden, almost like a real life Blair Witch Project almost, that managing to find this piece of work is an achievement and a treasure in itself, no matter what form you get it in.
Yeah, this is where I sort of can't connect with the unacceptable thing. Like, even if you're saying, it's not that you're saying it's unacceptable for a film, it's unacceptable for your own viewing standards, like your personal, what you're willing to contend with as a viewer. For me, once you put a restriction like that in place, you lose an enormous amount of cinema, because so many films that either are legally impossible to distribute, like this one, or have just fallen out of the capitalist model of some distributor or some, publisher feels that it can make the money and it's got, or in the case of a lot of early cinema, it's just the copies have just degraded, or like bits of the film don't exist anymore. And so for me, watching a lot of the time, if I'm watching like an old silent film, or I'm watching like a more obscure, like a real deep cut niche film, it's a choice between watching a heavily compromised version that maybe has bits missing, that has like very variable picture quality throughout the film. The sound quality might be awful. It's not, as you said, what people sat down to in 1923 when they like bought their cinema ticket and sat down. They saw something clearer than I'm getting to see. But or in some cases that's not, it's the inverse. But let's just say, when you watch a film like we have done with Superstar, and you're seeing it in bad shape, which makes it harder to hear or see certain elements. Oftentimes it's a choice between that or nothing. And the way I look at it, let's say you take like the films that are that would be hurt the most by the sort of audio-visual experience being compromised. Let's say Mad Max Fury Road. Now, this is not a realistic scenario, but let's say the only way to watch Mad Max Fury Road, and not the only way temporarily, but the only way forever, like this is the only way you're ever going to get to see it for the whole rest of your life, is in some really, really bad picture quality, muffled, there's scenes missing here and there. It's just like a fucked copy, because and as I said, that is the case for thousands of films, lots of like old George Méliès film and lots of stuff. Well, personally, I would still want to watch Mad Max Fury Road, because although it's inferior to another hypothetical version of the film that I'm not ever going to get to see, it is still of interest to me to see that film and see the artistic merit that still shines through, that's still evident. And Superstar is obviously a good example of this, where the better viewing experience of this film, where, I mean, obviously it was doomed right from its inception, because there's no way that he was going to be able to release it with all of that copyrighted music. But let's say that law goes away, right? That you know, the limits of fair use are extended, and he still has all the old 60mm negatives or whatever he shot this on, and he can do like a 4K remaster. Then that version of the film is better. Like, that is undeniable to me. But if that's never going to happen, I'm never going to see that film, which is probably the case, and certainly is the case for films where it's just we don't have that. Sometimes I'm on Letterboxd and I'm looking up a director after I've seen a film by him, and I see another film, and I'm like, oh, that looks really good, that looks intriguing, and then I sort of do a bit of research and I realize that's a lost film. We know the film existed, we've got posters of it, we've got a sort of synopsis, we've got reviews from the time, but I'll never see that film. It's just 100% gone. That's so frustrating to me, and I would always take any level of picture quality over just not getting to see the film whatsoever. I think, like you said, there's the story element. You know, when you watch a film in bad picture quality, like, and I'm not talking about, you know, it's only in 1080p, it's not in 4K or something, not nitpicky, pedantic bad picture quality, but just like fully, like, you know, it's a rough ride, like we've seen here with Superstar. There's kind of always a story associated with it. Once a film either can't be maintained by like big corporate entities, or isn't going to be maintained by them because there's no ROI in constantly updating it and retransferring it and stuff like that, then it's only kept alive by film enthusiasts, really. And so much of the films I've watched from a long time ago, mostly early cinema, but it can be more recent films as well sometimes, they only really exist because like the people passionate about them, and these could be professionals working in laboratories, or it could just be like some dude who works in like Burger King, just finding some obscure VHS from Argentina and ripping it to archive.org and handwriting subtitles for it. So whatever it is, there is some sort of story element to like, look, let's preserve what we can from this film. So, and I feel like, just talking about my own personal viewing experience, which is I think what you're referring to when you say that you kind of have a level that you won't accept, I would go, well, if you're watching the film in the best state you possibly can, and the film is offering some value to you in terms of like the filmmaking and so forth, then that to me is like enough. And I think if we ever get a good version of Superstar, like a really proper, slick version of it, then I'd be up for watching it again because it's such a short little film. But I think you still get a hell of a lot of what this film is from the film in its current state. So anyway, that's a little tangent on film preservation and picture quality and stuff like that. As you said, there is something about whether it's a film you're not supposed to see or just a film that's hard to see. You know, it's a TV show that aired in Norway in the 80s, and, you know, it's really bad versions of it that still have the commercials in, that have like fan-made subtitles using Google Translate, and there's all of these layers of abstraction that are sort of, you know, restricting your access to it, but you can still get through and derive an enormous amount of enjoyment from it. That's I kind of like that pursuit as well. I like that sort of chase of what can I get out of this. And also there's so many things where, like, especially our generation who, you know, fostered a love of art and film and music and stuff before the internet came along, and then got to experience the floodgates opening of when the likes of Napster came along. I remember there's so many pieces of music particularly, but it could be any form of media, that I coveted massively, and I was like, I'll never get to experience that. It was put out as a little 7-inch vinyl in the early 90s, late 80s, limited run. It's before the band signed with a major label. Those copies were bought, they exist, they're out there, but there's literally zero chance I'll ever hear that music. Going from that to like, being able to access all that stuff was amazing. And yeah, I think I definitely consume a lot of media that isn't sort of being supported by conventional models like Netflix and stuff like that. And that, I guess, means that you have to be, well, ideally you can derive enjoyment from it, even if it's like a bit messed up, at the beginning of its cut off or something like that. It's the kind of like nostalgic, rustic kind of thing, like where my favorite film of all time is It's a Wonderful Life, but it was years before I saw the first 3 minutes of the movie because my recorded off TV version of it, I must not have pressed record quick enough, so there is a bit of a story that's just inherently there in the piece that you're viewing when it's kind of fucked up and degraded, because you're both viewing the film itself and you're viewing that document of it, which, I don't know, there's something interesting about that to me.
Yeah, I guess my counterpoint to something like that was there's an infinite amount of movies probably for a human being to watch in their lifetime. Even if you dedicated your whole life to watching movies, you wouldn't even get as far as maybe the first shelf of all the movies you can watch. So while it's true, that's my only chance to get somewhat of a version of that movie. I don't even need to go down that rabbit hole until I've exhausted all the other movies on my list. So for me, lacking quality is something I don't need to concede on, because there's so many movies that I don't even need to get to the point where I'm so stuck for movies that I'm going to watch something that's degraded so much that is going to mess up my viewing experience. And to be clear, this isn't even degraded. There's probably a really good copy locked away in the museum, and this is a bootleg. And I take a point about It's a Wonderful Life, but that was then. And Napster, that was then. Now, I don't need to do that. I'm so privileged of what I can get and what I can find and how many years I have left. So I don't really need to do that. And what was the other thing? The other thing I was going to say was, that's completely gone from me now. What are we talking about? I've had a brain fart. Will I remember this or will I not? Oh yeah, I would. We've watched a lot of Wim Wenders movies recently, and they've all been, so we're told, immaculately restored to the. People have really spent time getting them to the best quality and the best experience that we could get. I would rather wait on the off chance of that, which probably will happen more and more now, than give myself a lesser experience. I'd rather wait for the Kings of the Road remastered or the other movies in that catalogue and then wait for that experience rather than hunt down movies when I've got such a catalogue to work through of movies that don't give me that problem. But at the same time, I take your point, and there is merit in that as well.
Yeah, I suppose the issue with that is, like, if you wait, you just won't ever get to see the film. Like, it's going to be way less than 1% of films that are currently, in a bad state that are going to eventually end up getting that Wim Wenders treatment of being some like incredible Criterion release. A lot of the films that I watch that are from early cinema and are in a bad state, it's not that no one's taken the time to like try and restore them. Like they have been, they've had enormous money poured into their restoration. That people have done everything they can because they're of such importance in terms of the evolution of the medium. But there's only so much you can do when, you know, you literally can't find reels, or you can find reels, but they're all from different sources and they look very different stuff. So I think you're certainly right in saying that you'll never run out of films that are in a good state, and you'll never be sort of forced to watch a film that's in poor picture quality because you've watched all the films that are in good picture quality. But I guess for me, like, I watch films, like every film I watch is because I'm interested in that film, not because I feel like it's meeting a certain quality standard in terms of like how polished it is or whatever. I'm just like, I want to see this film because it seems interesting to me. And that, you know, a small percentage of the time brings me to films that are, there's just no way to view that film up to the standards of like, you know, a new release comes out, you watch it and it's perfect picture quality and stuff like that. So if I was, and especially because I'm into animation a lot, I'm into horror a lot, and I've gone quite deep on those genres, and you know, I love watching, let's say, like the movies that formed those genres, and the movies that, you know, came from like further afield, more obscure areas. They don't have much commercial appeal at this point. Like, you're not going to find them on a streaming service or something like that, but they were greatly influential on the medium. And because I have an interest in them, it's like that trumps the fact that I could watch the new movie that came out on Netflix that's in perfect 4K, but isn't sort of calling my name. So that's where that's kind of what brings me to it. It can be frustrating, but at the same time, the fact that these films, like let's say an early silent film that still exists, we still managed to preserve it. It's still watchable. It might be missing some bits. It might have this issue, that issue. The fact that we're getting to see that film at all is often miraculous. Almost all films do get lost. I'm not talking about made by 20th Century Fox or something, but like, let's say me and you make a movie now, and you know, it plays in like a couple of cinemas in London at some festivals or something like that, and then we self-press a DVD of it and we put it out and stuff. Like, there is basically no chance that people will have any way of watching that in like 50 years time. So almost all films go the way of the dodo, and certainly in the early days of cinema, where they were like melting down the celluloid because it was more valuable than the art that was on it. I think it's a shame, obviously, how much cinema just kind of disappears like that. And the ideal is that you get to watch everything in its perfectly preserved state, but getting to see these really important, influential works, whether they're influential on an individual's career, the evolution of that director's career, or they were even potentially, you know, had a greater cultural impact than that, to me is compelling, and compelling enough that I will get to that, even though I haven't run out of good quality stuff. But yeah, anyway, and to be honest, I think with Superstar, for me, it is missing some bits in that black text where you can't always read everything that's on it. Everything else about it, I'm like, that's fine. Like, it doesn't look great, but I think we're getting 90% of what the film is trying to communicate to us, which is like ample. But yeah, there are certainly films that are more demolished, and I suppose there is a limit where you go like, this is, I can kind of squint and make out what they were trying to do here, but it's there's just too much has been lost, I guess.
Yeah, I guess for me it's like and I'm not sure if this is my first encounter with something like this as well, which is why I'm having this reaction. I don't think I've ever watched something this shoddy from a technical point of view in terms of the copy itself. But it's like, when I went to visit some ruins of this famous monument or like this historical site, it's more like, yeah, I get what it is and what it means to people, and I get its history and I guess its significance, but I'm not looking at that. I'm not getting to see that. And that's my problem with these movies. I feel like I'm not getting to see the movie. I'm seeing the ruins of the ground. The ruins of the Colosseum's a bad example because that's probably still impressive, but the ruins of a castle, it's pretty cool, but it's not what it's intended to be.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. It's kind of like Pompeii, where they go like, yeah, the Mount Vesuvius erupted and it went over the town, so therefore the town is perfectly preserved. And you go there, it's like, well, yeah, it's got some walls and stuff, but you know, I've maybe oversold it with the perfect preservation thing. But I think, let's say that, just to use the ruins analogy, 'cause I think it's a great way of looking at it. If you go to something like Notre Dame Cathedral, of course that burnt significantly recently, but you go to, like, you know, something that's of historical significance, some old mosque in Istanbul or something, and it still looks phenomenal. Like it's like amazing. It's delivering so much of the architectural experience that it did in its heyday. Then that's obviously amazing. It transports you back. It's like, oh man, people are looking up at this very fresco on the wall or whatever, and that's one possible scenario. If you go to a place where literally it's completely gone, like you're now stood in a field, 100% level ground, and you know from your own research that there was something really significant stood on that ground. You imagine those at two complete ends of the scale, of the spectrum. One, the latter, where it's completely gone, to me that's the lost film, right? So that's like when you hear about film, you're like, you can't even watch a minute of it. You can't even watch a minute of it. You might, if you're very lucky, you might be able to see a frame of it, right? So you can then extrapolate the aesthetic out of that or something. You might hear some reports. You're piecing together information, but the very thing itself, the building or the film, you can have zero exposure to, and it all has to be like this feeling like, what, you've got reverence for a thing that you can't actually experience. So if you go, I think now people are going to differ on how impactful that is. If you go to a place, you travel all the way out to like Syria or something, and you're stood on complete level ground, and you're going, it all happened here. This is where this happened. This is where that happened. For some people, that's going to be quite a powerful experience, just knowing that like these very significant things where like that was 2 meters in that direction, and this probably would have been over here. And then for other people, they on a, I guess the most extreme, which I doubt you are, but the most extreme end of the spectrum is going to be like, it literally has to be like, you know, completely intact and preserved, and for me to appreciate it. I think in taking that in terms of film, of course, if you find out something it's a lost film, it's frustrating. You're like, well, if assuming you had interest in seeing it in the first place, you're like, I want to see that movie, but I can't. Like, it's completely untouchable. That's one sort of interpretation that you have of a lost film. But when you look at something like, we could take Superstar as an example, instead of being 100% gone, that's like 5% gone or 10% gone. Like it's the only difference between that and the films that we might be watching kind of like day in, day out, is that it has a degree of degradation, right? But literally the entire cut is there as far as I'm aware. It's not missing any scenes. It's not sourced from different places, the different parts of the movie. It's not, you know, this bit has got no sound, so they have to just like write over it what was probably being said at that point. Like, you're getting an enormous amount of the film there, and you're missing certain details. So looking at this again through the ruins analogy of the spectrum, this is somewhere in the mix. Maybe this is, like you said, the Colosseum or something, or the pyramids, where you're like, okay, it's not I'm not seeing every little engraving and everything that was there at the time, but I'm getting so much here that I can actually admire the craftsmanship, admire physically and visually, admire the filmmaking and what was being attempted. And it is possible that we have different requirements in terms of like how much still needs to be there. And I think this has come up before. We've talked about like fidelity in music and in film and stuff like that. And I think you tend to care about that more than I do. And I've got friends who care about it more than I do. Like they won't listen to music on Spotify, for example, because they feel that's too compressed and it's just too far removed from the work as it was intended to be enjoyed. And I'm probably quite an extreme case in terms of the opposite direction of that personally. But yeah, I suppose everyone has their sensibilities, but it is just like the runes thing where you're kind of making up the difference in your head to an extent, I think. And your willingness to do that is going to be how much you care about that thing. If you don't care about Roman history and architecture and archaeology and all of these kind of things, then you're not interested in going to see something that's not currently in the present day impressive, right? Every way in which it's impressive requires like you adding to it in your head with additional context rather than it's just like plain to see. So yeah, interesting. I think this is it's good that this film kind of prompted this conversation, because I think as much as I like the film quite a bit, it's a short little film and there isn't an enormous amount to discuss about it, I think, but it's definitely brought up an interesting conversation, because I guess, like you said, we don't really watch that many films, at least together, that don't come from more conventional sort of publishing or distribution route to our eyes. So yeah, maybe that's something we need to delve a little bit deeper into.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.